Dinner and Learn, God of Our Understanding, Lesson 16, March 17, 2011.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Judaism and Recovery, God of Our Understanding, Jewish Spirituality and Recovery from Addiction. This is class number 16? 15 or 16? Class number 16, chapter 13, on page 107. We spoke about, the past few weeks, about the three parts that help us be healthy spiritually and in a relationship with God. And those refer to the three types of people that we engage with, the people who are above us, on the same level as us, and in a sense, under us, or at least perceived to be under us. And we said that the three principles of sponsorship, fellowship, and tolerance. So last week we talked about fellowship, and this week we're going to talk about the part of tolerance, which is in the piece of the Talmud that we quoted from Ethics of Our Fathers. It says, make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend, and the last piece is, judge every person favorably. It doesn't say don't be judgmental. By all means, be judgmental. Just judge them favorably. In the middle of the page, tolerance and goodwill to others is vital to recovery. The big book plainly states, resentment is the number one offender. So really, in this chapter, we're going to talk about how we get rid of our resentments. It's a big topic, because the opposite of tolerance is resentment. I can't have tolerance when I resent somebody. I can't have acceptance when I resent somebody. I can't have forgiveness when I resent somebody. So how do we get rid of our resentments? Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Many old-timers will attest that a relapse is often preceded by a feeling of indignation and intolerance. Thus, in recovery, just as one must have a teacher and a group of friends, it is crucial that one be accepting of all people. All people. That does not mean that we have to make ourselves into the proverbial doormat. What it does mean is that when we obsess on the wrongs that others have done us and see ourselves in the victim role, we remove ourselves from a relationship with God. And this is important, for resentment and spiritual consciousness are diametric opposites of each other. You can't have both. Either you have resentments, or you have spiritual consciousness. The Talmud says that when one becomes angry, it is as if he serves worshipping idols. Now, worshipping idols is the worst crime. Is the worst crime in the Torah. It's like all the way in the beginning of the Ten Commandments says, I am the Lord your God, thou shalt not have any idols in front of me. There's three sins that overrule our obligation to stay alive by all means, and these are adultery, murder, and idolatry. So if someone says either you worship this idol, I will kill you, the Torah says that's one of the instances when you got to let go of your life. So idolatry, which means disconnecting myself from my relationship with God and worshiping something else instead, idolatry, is not worth living for. Because living without a relationship with God is not a life worth living. So, the Talmud says that although being angry is not one of the 613 commandments, so there is no prohibition directly in the written Torah on not being angry, but the Talmud says it falls into the category of idolatry. Every time I'm angry is considered as if I have worshipped an idol. Literally. Why? Quite literally, anger is a rejection of God and lack of faith. If one believes that everything in this world comes from God, and that God is in complete control, then one cannot ever be angry. Anger is a feeling of indignation toward a perceived injustice. I deserve something. I didn't get it. I deserve to be treated in a certain way, and I wasn't. So, I'm angry at the person who treated me less than I expected, less than I deserved.
So are you saying we can never be angry?
Well, the Talmud says that when we are angry, we are acting as a person who's worshiping idols. So let's understand that. We are angry when we feel that something shouldn't have happened the way that it did. But feeling outrage about something that has already happened to us is to argue with reality, which is to argue with God. Surely the person of faith may at times express displeasure. One, that's okay. Disappointment, it's good too. Or even grief. That's okay too. For these are merely opinions. But there is a world of difference between saying, I don't like the way things are, and saying things really shouldn't be the way they are. So when I am angry, I'm stating that reality is unacceptable. Now who creates reality? God. So I'm saying, I don't like the way God is doing things. In other words, if I were God, I would have done it way different. How does this relate to interpersonal relationships? Rabbi Shais Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, explained that just as one must calmly accept the reality of a damage caused by an overt act of God, so must one have the same attitude when suffering at the hands of another person. Notwithstanding the fact that the offender may still be liable to God for his or misdeed, what should concern us is that God already decreed the damage that came of the offender for his choice. Okay. So to clarify this obscure passage of the Tanya, basically it's like this. We're going to call the slapper and the slappee so that everyone understands. Okay? Mr. A and Mr. B. Mr. A is the slapper, Mr. B is the slappee. So I am the slappee, and I just got slapped in my face. There, thank you. I got slapped in my face. So now, I have two options. One option is to be angry at the person who slapped me. And in a sense I'm saying, if not for him slapping me, I wouldn't have been slapped. Which means the only reason I was slapped was because of his choice. The only reason I was slapped was because of his choice. And because he chose to slap me, and that's why I got slapped, I'm upset at him. Most of us, 99.99% of us, will react that way. Rabbi Shais Zalman says, nope, you got it wrong. The slappee would have been slapped even if the slapper wouldn't be here. Imagine. If not for the fact that God wanted this person to be slapped, there is no person in the world who could have slapped him. If God does not want me to get slapped right now, all of you and your brothers and your sisters and your cousins can try to slap me. But if God decided that I won't be slapped, I just won't. So if I was slapped, it was because God decided that I was going to be slapped. So the Alter Rebbe says, Rabbi Shais Taub, basically, if you were slapped, God decided that you should be slapped. Now, that does not get the other guy, the slapper, off the hook at all. because he still had a choice to slap or not to slap. He chose to slap, and God put you next to him when God wanted you to be slapped. But really, it was his choice to slap you, and he has to make amends for it, and he has to clean up his act, and he has to repent for it. But as far as you're concerned, the slappee, you have no business with that guy. You have business with God. If I think that I could have been slapped against God's will, it means that there's another existence in the world who has control over my life other than God. Because God could decide that I'm not going to get slapped, but slapper could come and slap me still. That would give him control over what happens in my life. And that is idol worshiping, giving powers to something outside of God. Are we clear? Okay. So that, my friends, accordingly, getting over our resentments is far more than a matter of unburdening ourselves of emotional pain. You know, sometimes they give you stones to carry in your pocket and say, when you're done, when the stones are a bother and you want to get rid of your resentments, why don't you throw the stones away? It is how we get in touch with God's purpose and plans of our life. For our lives. As long as we attribute to the actions of others any power to define our lives, then we submit ourselves to the tyranny of people, places, and things, rather than placing ourselves in the care of God. I allow for stuff that's happening around me to control how I feel. Oh, I believe that the people, places, and things have an impact on how my life is being lived. Thus, even when there have been people in our lives who have intended us harm, our faith tells us that none of that could have ever derailed our lives from God's plan for us. To carry resentment is to imagine that a created being has the kind of power of our lives that only God has. To forgive our enemies is to take away that power and to attribute it only to God. And in the next little chapter, it talks about the story of Joseph and his brothers. And they took him, and everyone saw the play. They sold him as a slave. But when later it was revealed to them that he was the viceroy, and now he had control over their destiny, they got worried. They said, Joseph, don't do anything bad to us. Don't take revenge upon us. And Joseph says, me? Revenge on you? He says, for sure I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm never going to harm you. And not just because I'm a nice guy who knows how to forgive. He says, if I take revenge on you, it means that I believe that my whole story here was caused by you guys. But I have a much higher belief than that. I believe that this whole story was because God put me here. Not only God put me here for a bad reason, God put me here for a good reason. The good reason is that now your families are fed through the fact that I am the viceroy of Egypt. So Joseph said, not only do I not have resentments against you, I am glad that God's plan came through you. Thank you very much. And he meant it. So, how do we get rid of our resentment? Well, all of you here know about the fourth step. And if you turn to page 111, you'll see in the box, the way the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous suggests we do a fourth step. There's 4 columns. And on the first column we list all the people or the places or the things that we have a resentment against. We write what happened. We write how it affects us. And then in the 4th column, we write our part. What's my part in it? Okay? So, we're going to go to page 110. Getting to the root of resentments. What I consider ingenious about the fourth step is that it uses an awareness of our negative feelings to get us to the root of our troubles, ourselves. The fourth column is the most important column. If we were to start with the fourth column, no one would have anything to write on the fourth step. Me? No. So, what happens? We start out talking about others, which is always easy. But we end up making invaluable discoveries about our own nature, which are much harder to come by. So we get tricked into writing all this stuff. And then we're told, okay, who's in charge? From this position of self-discovery, we're empowered to make the only kind of real change that's ever possible. A change in ourselves. Because we can't change what happens in column 1, any of those places, people, or things. We cannot change what happened in column 2 because it's the past. We cannot change what happens in column 3 because these are character defects. We can change our actions. That's in column 4, my part. In other words, the first column where we list those toward whom we feel negatively is not the main point, it's only the starting point. What it will prove both enlightening and liberating is an examination of our own nature and how that has gotten us in trouble, which is the story that we talked about last week about the Jewish person who visited the third Chabad Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Lubavitch, complained that he was being disrespected by his fellow congregants in synagogue. They literally step all over me. And the rabbi responded, if one spread oneself out over the entire synagogue, then wherever others step, they're stepping on him. When we are complaining about others, when we have resentment to other people, how they say in English, it takes two to tango? That one? Yeah, okay. Wasn't lost in translation. So, how many of us can calm down enough and strip the emotions out of the equation and think for a second about what part I contributed? And I'm not saying that I contributed 100%. The same way, I can't say I contributed 0%. But somewhere in between. Somewhere in between 1 and 99 is my contribution. My contribution to the very resentment that's eating me up. I have the control switch to actually turn it off if I so choose. As a rule, we get hurt when we have spread ourselves out. The hallmark of the truly selfless and humble person is not that he forgives easily, I like that, but he is impossible to offend in the first place. If we have been personally offended or hurt, that doesn't mean that we're necessarily asking for it, but it does mean that if we didn't want to avoid feeling slighted in the future, we'll have to reduce our ego to a more useful size. An ego that is too big is always apt to be bumped and jostled by others. And, by the way, an ego that's too small is also not good. So we have to have our ego at the right size. The Talmud says the right size for our ego is 1/64. In percentage, that would be 1.5%, I guess, or something like that. Whatever ego you feel, whatever you feel, just reduce it by 64. That's the exact point where you should feel. All right. Let's move along. On page 112. Now we're going to talk about a different part of the flip side of the resentment And the fourth step is how to deal with people who are truly sick. Sometimes our column says, my part is that I have a relationship with a person who's truly sick. That's my part. I should not be in a relationship with that person. Okay? Sometimes there is actually people who are harmful to us in a real sense. What if even after having identified one has to work on oneself, one still can let go of feelings of resentment toward others? Just because one is now focused on oneself doesn't mean that these bitter feelings will immediately disappear. How are we to look upon those people who have wronged us or caused us pain? The big book suggests that one assume a totally new perspective of those who have hurt us, a perspective of compassion. Page 67 in the big book. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they like ourselves were sick too. We asked God to help us, show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we say to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. We avoid retaliation or argument. We won't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy a chance of being helpful. Every one of us is to some extent spiritually and emotionally deficient. We all have character flaws. The greatest proof of this there can be is that we have caused someone pain. I caused pain to others. I, who is upset about the fact that others have caused me pain, have probably, in the past day, week, month, year, or decade, caused pain to another person. If we were 100% completely healthy, we would only spread kindness and good feelings to other people. In this light, we can view others who have hurt us as manifesting their own sickness. Again, knowledge of this fact does not excuse their behavior, but it does allow us to let go of the tiring work of condemning and censoring our fellow. When we carry around feelings of moral superiority, victimhood, and righteous anger, it is only we who lose. As they say, carrying resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Page 70 in the big book. If we have been through about our personal inventory, we have written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward the men, all men, even our enemies. For we look on them as sick people. The Talmud relates a story about the great sage Rabbi Meir. A gang of thugs plagued his neighborhood and vexed him to no end. Apparently the conduct became so egregious that Rabbi Meir thought it best to pray that the gangsters die. Before doing so, however, his wife, Beruria, who's quoted many times in the Talmud as a very wise woman, like most women, spoke to him, quoting to her husband the verse in Psalm, let sins be uprooted from the earth, and the wicked will be no more. Let the sins be uprooted from the earth, and then the wicked will be no more. She then proceeded to explain the verse as follows. It doesn't say that sinners should be uprooted, but that the sins should be uprooted. Do not pray that they die, but that they should repent. Then automatically the wicked will be no more. That is, they will no longer be wicked. Which means, in other words, we act out when our character defects are in full force and full swing. The appropriate way to resolve negativity is not to take away the people who are experiencing it or producing it, but to remove the character defects that are fueling it. We can take care of our character defects by taking our own inventory and by making a good 5th step, 6th step, and 7th steps. And by having an appropriate 10th step. But how do we get rid of another person's character defect? Well, one option is to take their inventory. Bad one. The only thing that's left for us is to pray for them. To feel true compassion. When we show compassion to another human being, when we truly feel love for a person, compassion for a person who just did harm to us, who acted on the character defects and made me feel less than, then a lot of things happen. First of all, I grow immensely. So even if this guy never changes his behavior, I already gained so much just by praying for them. But really, God loves to see His children get along with each other. When I hear my kids fight, I go in my bedroom and I close the door and I take a book. I don't want to be around them. When they play nicely, I run to the playroom. I'm right on the floor. I love being around them when they're so nice to each other. When God sees us getting along with each other, God wants to be there. When God is there, the presence of God may awaken the person to become a better person. That's kind of how the process works. As far as recovery is concerned, whether or not our prayer for our enemies will actually be effective in transforming them is somewhat immaterial. That's number 2. God's presence will be felt and they will be healed. What is of vital importance is that compassion towards those who have harmed us shifts the paradigm for ourselves. Feeling like a victim means toying with a false sense of entitlement that leads only to frustration and heartache. So if I have a resentment, which means I was wronged, I'm a victim, but a person in recovery can scarcely afford to let someone else's problem compromise his or her own serenity. Taking a compassionate view of those who have harmed us allows us to take back the power that we have unwittingly granted such people in determining our own sense of well-being. It frees us from wasting our peace of mind on things we cannot control. As they say, when you hold on to resentment, you are giving somebody you don't even like rent-free space in your head. Well, if the 4th step is the major inventory, then the 10th step is a spot check inventory that we do all the time. And there is a Jewish prayer that we say every night before retiring to bed. We say the Shema. But as an introduction to the Shema, we read a prayer that is considered Cheshbon HaNefesh, soul accounting. I'm reading on the bottom. In many customs, the prescribed bedtime ritual begins with the following prayer, on the bottom of 114. Master of the universe, I hereby forgive anyone who has angered or vexed me, or sinned against me. either physically or financially, against my honor or anything else that is mine, whether accidentally or intentionally, inadvertently or deliberately, by speech or by deed, in this incarnation or in any other. I forgive even for previous lives. Interestingly enough, it begins with a paragraph about forgiving those who have harmed us. Since the bedtime prayer is meant to serve as one's own personal stock-taking, why does it begin with calling to mind the offenses that one has suffered at the hands of others, even if it is for forgiving them? To one who is familiar with recovery, this should be an easy question to answer. We start our inventory, the fourth step, by cataloging all the ways in which other people have troubled us. But this is merely a jumping off point. The result and true objective of this exercise is to place the onus for change squarely upon ourselves. Indeed, the prayers continue, may it be your will, Lord my God and God of my forefathers, that I may sin no more and not repeat my sins. Whatever sins I have done before you, may you blot them out in your abundant mercies. And by the way, when we ask God, may be your will, we know already what God's will is. Yeah, God's will is that we should behave appropriately. So we're not saying, oh, I'm not sure about God's will, I hope and I pray that God's will is that I should behave like a person, not like an animal. No. We are asking for God's will to connect to God's will, for God's will to be relevant to us in our daily lives. May it be your will. When we may I be your will. May I live my life according to your will, which is that I should behave appropriately. How did we get from forgiving others for the harm they have done us to asking God to prevent us from sinning again? The other fellow is the sinner, right? He's the one who did us wrong. So why are we suddenly talking about our sins? Just as in the story of the man who complained that everyone in the synagogue was stepping on him only to realize that he has spread himself thin out over the entire synagogue, so do we begin by recalling how we have been hurt by others only to end up asking God to erase our own transgressions. Pain and distress can be marvelous indicators of the years of our lives that we're trying too hard to control. So first we forgive others and let go of resentment. Then we turn all of these resentments around and gain insight into ourselves. This is a true soul accounting. Page 116. The miracle of self-transformation. By forgiving others, we may or may not see open miracles. But what is certain is by making peace with all people, even our enemies, we transcend our very nature. That, in itself, is a wonder of sorts. See, naturally, we are inclined, naturally I mean by our animal soul. We talked about last week, we have a godly soul that yearns to be selfless, and an animal soul who yearns to be selfish. A godly soul who yearns to disconnect from all the physical and connect only with the spiritual. An animal soul that wishes to disconnect from all the spiritual and connect with all the material and the self-pleasuring items in this world. So from nature, from a sense of our animalistic self, our nature is to be selfish. Which means, if you mess with me, I will mess with you. If you hurt me, I will hurt you. If you touch someone in my family, I will destroy your whole family. That's nature. When another human being is being forgiven, although they harmed us, we are acting beyond the nature of our animalistic self. We're tapping into the quote-unquote nature of our godly self. We are bringing godly forces into the forces of nature. Just like when God split the Red Sea. And there was the forces of God that ripped through the forces of nature. By nature, water doesn't stand, it flows. And God ripped open the sea so dry so the people can go through it. Or the miracle of the holiday of Purim that we're celebrating. God comes in and just breaks all the laws of nature, makes something wonderful happen. I have the power to make those miracles too. When I bring the power of God into the power of my nature. What is a miracle after all? A miracle is something that transcends the laws of nature. Indeed, that which is miraculous is deemed supernatural, above nature. Rising above our own nature is a miracle. The kind of psychic change and absolute transformation of personality that is possible through the steps is nothing short of supernatural. That which medicine and therapy, argument, reason, toughness, and love, punishment, advice, and consequence cannot accomplish has somehow inexplicably taken place. It is any wonder then that we give all of the credit to God. Who could have done this but He? And let's not forget that God does this through us, through the godly soul inside of us. Let's not be confused here. We don't sleep and rest on our laurels and then God does miracle for us. In recovery, we make the miracle by inviting us into our house, inviting God into our house, into ourselves, by allowing a godly soul to shine over our animalistic soul, by pushing away all the desires and the lust and the selfish actions and replacing it with selfless compassion, kindness, and godly will. And then God makes a miracle because we let Him in. We're going to close this section of the part 4 of the book, which is healing each other. So this is a last word. Final word on the subject cannot be stressed enough how crucial to spiritual fitness is the ability to maintain healthy relationships with other people. That's something that a lot of other spiritual paths have sometimes neglected. Which is, I cannot have a true relationship with God if I don't know how to be a quote-unquote mensch in Yiddish. A human being, a responsible human being who keeps healthy relations with others, relationships. I can pray all day, I can study all day, I can read the big book by heart, First 164, with the Roman numerals, with the stories, with all the things that you do. But if I can't have a normal relationship with another person, I'm not missing a detail. I'm missing a crucial component. Healthy relationship with others. Maintain healthy relationships with other people. If it feels normal, it's normal. As most old timers will tell you, you didn't recover just so you could go to meetings. The true litmus test of spiritual strength is one ability to face life. Recovery is a manner of living that must extend far beyond the 1 hour that one sits in a room full of people who have all spiritual growth in mind. The 12th and culminating step plainly states, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried, help other alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. I have heard many an old-time advisor when having trouble with family members, co-workers, friends, relationships. One should treat them as one would a newcomer to recovery. That is, with compassion, tolerance, patience, and understanding. It is in the group that those who come to recover have their first experience of what it's like to connect peacefully and honestly with others. But the real application of this gift is when it is put to use in a daily living outside of the group. True spiritual consciousness is always consonant with the undistinguishable form, as indistinguishable from being able to relate well to our fellow human being. In Yiddish expression, humorously describes the person who tries to pursue spirituality while in isolation from others. A tzaddik in pelts, a saint in furs. He's in the cold room, he's in the cold house, but he's warm because he's wearing this thick, comfortable fur coat. Perfect. He's not cold. But what happens to the rest of the people in the room? They're freezing. They don't have coats. He's spiritually fit. Good for him. Everybody else is freezing. Another way of warm oneself would be to turn the fireplace on. He would be warm, and so will others. So the tzaddik in pelts is not really the best way to reach spiritual growth. That's a spiritual path that excludes others. As the Hasidic master explained, when it's cold, you can either put on a fur coat or build a fire. In either case, you feel warm, but only by building a fire is there benefits for others. It has been observed that the Ten Commandments were given on 2 equal-sized tablets, and the first tablets are written to obligations to God. The Lord your God, no other gods, so on. While in the second tablet are written obligations to humanity. Do not murder, steal, commit adultery, lie, or covet. The 2 tablets are equal. Indeed, they are the same. As the great sage Hillel once responded to a prospective convert who asked him to some of the Torah in the amount of time that he would sin at 1 foot. What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. This is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. Which means, at the core of recovery is learning a new way to relate to other people. At the core of recovery, the reason we are, the problem that we have, that got us into addiction in the first place, is our relationship with people, places, and things. So, if the solution to our problem gives us a great relationship with God, but still does not give us a great relationship with people, places, and things around us, then we found something good to be busy with, but we didn't really solve our real problem, which is to live life on life's terms. So ignoring, feeling good about oneself, and feeling connected to God, but not allowing other people to be connected with us at the same time, does not fulfill the real premise of the program.